Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Chamber Chat. My name is Carol Guest. I am the chair of the board for the Greater Houston Black Chamber of Commerce. And today we are blessed to have one of our Texas Democratic candidates for the United States Senate, Ms. MJ Hegar. Hello, Ms. Hegar. How are you today?
Hello, Chairwoman. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. And so our purpose here today is to give our chamber members the opportunity to hear about your platform, what your thoughts are, why you want to be a U.S. Senator, and answer some of the questions that our chamber members have as far as their future as business persons and as African Americans here in the United States.
Okay.
So why don't we get started by just letting our chamber members know a little bit about yourself.
Okay, great. Before I do that, can I just ask a favor? Going to a virtual environment, the thing that I have found that I am missing is that collaborative kind of feedback to normally the way I would work in person is I would answer questions and talk about my vision, but then I would solicit that input back. And that's what I've really been missing over the last couple months. So if I could just ask your members when they hear us talking, if they think, well, I have an idea or I have a solution or I have a thought on her solution or here's an unintended consequence of that well-intended policy position, I would really encourage them to reach out to our campaign and give me that feedback.
Okay,
but my name, I appreciate that, Carol. Thank you.
No, we're grateful that you want our input. So we'll certainly get that together for you.
Input and collaborating with communities is how I build my platform completely. So I'm really missing that. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name's MJ Hegar. I am a combat veteran and a working mom. I grew up in a working class family in very rural Texas. I spent 12 years in the military. I spent 5 years working in healthcare. Most people know I was in the military. I spent 2 years working in the tech industry. I got my undergrad and my executive MBA from UT Austin, and I am running for the U.S. Senate as a fulfillment of the oath that I took to support and defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, when I put on the uniform. But also because of my 2 young boys, which might interrupt us, by the way, so I apologize in advance if that happens. But I have a 3 and a 5-year-old, and I have an ardent desire to protect the world that they're growing up into and the country that they're inheriting. I know that I'm coming to y'all at a time when we are facing some serious challenges, but I don't know about you. I feel like something is different in the air, that the things that we've been fighting for so long have become mainstream as more folks hear us talking about these issues. And I feel the grassroots energy across the state, not only during the year that I was driving the entire state in my truck, but now as we have transitioned to a more virtual environment. I just feel the energy and I'm very excited at the opportunity that we have to elect some good servant leaders up and down the ballot. The only way that we can ensure that we can rise to the challenges that we're facing right now and come out on the other end a stronger country is to elect leaders like myself who have a demonstrated ability to take on tough problems and the powerful forces in DC who try to intimidate folks like us and challenge a system that is not working for everyday Texans. We can't just keep electing career politicians who are married to this system and accept the system and don't challenge the system if we expect things to change. So I'm very excited about this conversation that we're going to have, and I'm really excited about working with y'all not only over the next 4.5 months, but as your next senator, I'm really excited to collaborate and work with y'all as I try to govern and represent this great state.
Well, that's good to hear. We're happy that we want to collaborate with our elected officials. So we're glad that you're open and will be available to work.
Can't do it without you. So thank you.
Thank you. So this is kind of a burning question, among our membership that I'm about to ask you. Okay. There have been at least 440,000 Black businesses to close since February.
Yes.
As part of this pandemic. And one of the ways that wealth is created in our community is through entrepreneurship. What plans would you have going forward? We don't know when the pandemic is going to be over, but what plans would you have in mind for African-American entrepreneurs to, grow wealth through entrepreneurship? And is there any legislation that you might propose to help us?
Absolutely. I believe that there are already very big barriers to entrepreneurs in Texas before COVID-19. And those barriers are so much bigger for minorities and women. Our economic well-being was obviously devastated by this pandemic, but Black-owned businesses, as you've just pointed out, were especially hard hit. Washington needs to put politics aside, which I know sounds funny in the current climate. Maybe we just need to elect leaders who can do that, and provide immediate relief for Texas small businesses and minority-owned businesses. I believe that the federal assistance that has already been passed by Congress didn't go where it needed to go. So it's not really a question of what legislation do you pass. It's really accountability and enforcing that legislation in the first place. We need to have better access to capital. The Black-owned businesses were left out of this relief largely because the lack of transparency and accountability allowed for the people who have the networks in place already and the attorneys and the accountants to access a lot of the relief. Specifically in Houston right now with the skyrocketing cases, business owners need certainty and stability, and they need to know that our government has a plan for how we can make sure that we can protect public health, because that's what's really impacting, I think, small businesses. It's not just relief, but how the pandemic is being handled is keeping people home. And that's obviously disproportionately impacting small businesses, but definitely businesses in communities of color. Looking past this pandemic, we really have to address the systemic problem of the barriers to Black entrepreneurs and Black-owned businesses struggling to access capital. It's been something I've been talking about since before this pandemic.
Yes, that is definitely the access to capital piece. Even before the pandemic was an issue for us. And so it's good to hear that you've identified that as a problem in our community, because it's really the main thing. We're not at a shortage of expertise, of, a willingness to work hard and Absolutely. Go after our dreams in our community. That the access to capital is a really big thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really big thing. So switching gears a little bit, you mentioned that you spent some time in the healthcare industry, and a lot of the members in our chamber are small businesses. We would like to be able to offer healthcare to our employees. Sometimes it's difficult. So what are your thoughts about doing a healthcare co-op or some other type of program that could help our small businesses provide healthcare to our employees?
Yeah, I support it. During my time getting my business degree, one of the things that was very clear was that the employer provided healthcare model is such a huge barrier to small business creation. Whether it's the fear of losing your own healthcare coverage before you quit your job and start a small business, or the crippling costs of that coverage that prevent those businesses from succeeding in their first 5 years. I think that access to a public option and the creation of healthcare co-ops will be the fix that I'll be pursuing. What we're doing right now isn't working. I think that's clear. It was the case before the pandemic as well. You're going to hear me say that a lot. A lot of the things that are being magnified as problems now were problems before the pandemic, but are just more obvious now, being magnified now. With 1 out of every 5 Texans uninsured, access to healthcare is a human right, but it's also in everyone's best interest to have everyone covered, whether it's public health or healthcare costs for those with coverage. During my 5 years working in healthcare, I saw how much our astronomical medical bills are because so many people are seeking care in the highest possible cost setting, the trauma centers and the ERs and the urgent cares. So it really is in our best interest to get more people access to healthcare, even if you're one of those people who doesn't believe that it's your problem if your neighbor doesn't have healthcare. The pandemic has shown why it's also precarious to depend on our employers, right? Because when you have skyrocketing, record-breaking unemployment, then all of a sudden the healthcare crisis we were in before COVID is further exacerbated. When I think back to the best care that I got, I got pregnant with my first child while I was working in healthcare and about to get laid off because my healthcare network got bought out. And so of course my mind started, moving in a state that has such a high maternal mortality rate. When did I receive the best care? It was when I was on TRICARE. And that was when I was in the Air National Guard. And that's basically military Medicare. I want everyone to have access to that. So that's why I'm pursuing a public option, because I also believe that we should be able to choose what that access to care, means for our family, what access to quality, affordable care means to our family. And I think that co-ops can be a part of that solution in securing quality healthcare for all Texans. Co-ops are in the spirit of what a public option would do. Both they have lower administrative costs than private insurance, they increase competition, and and hopefully bend the cost curve downward some. But I think that there's other things we need to do while we pursue a public option and while we create co-ops. That we need to immediately reopen the Affordable Care Act enrollment to help the millions of Texans who don't have health insurance secure that life-saving healthcare, especially in the mid of pandemic. There's a lot we could talk about on healthcare, but the bottom line is, our politicians are playing politics with our lives. They're doing things like tearing down the Affordable Care Act just because it was a Democratic president who built his legacy on that in part. And they're doing these things, the slowing the testing, or the way that our politicians here in Texas are handling it, and they don't want to report high numbers of cases, so they're not testing. What is that about? I just don't understand. They're playing politics with our lives. So we just need to start electing servant leaders who serve our community instead of politicians who are trying to figure out how to get reelected next cycle.
Well, I think that all of the servant leadership is the key.
It is.
For whomever we place in office in Texas, nationwide, servant leadership is key. I mean,
it really is.
I think if we had more people with that mindset, things would probably go a lot better.
We need term limits maybe to instill that mindset.
You might be onto something. You might be onto So, and switching gears again, you had mentioned in your previous comment that African-American businesses missed out on a lot of PPP money.
Yes. So
if you were our next U.S. Senator, what would you put in place? What would you try to put in place that would ensure that, God forbid we're ever in this circumstance again, that the money would be distributed fairly?
Well, let's be clear that I'm preaching to the choir here. I know that you know this, but it's important to acknowledge that this is not just a pandemic issue, that this is not the first time that Black-owned businesses were left behind in government relief, especially there in Houston. We see it across the board. FEMA relief, really, I believe, and this is why I said I want community input on the unintended consequences of sometimes well-intended legislation, is that the bottom line is when we have it systemically to where Black-owned businesses are left behind with government relief, then we need more accountability and transparency. I mean, it's unacceptable that 95% of Black-owned businesses stood close to no chance of receiving PPP loans. And this is a well accepted and even acknowledged by John Cornyn, and yet he doesn't come through and say, here's the fix to it. I believe it was 92% of those who asked for Small Business Administration aid reported not getting the relief that they requested. And so it's unacceptable. And we just need people to not just acknowledge, yep, that happened, but he's acting like it's not a problem that needs to be fixed. He pushed a bill to add money to the PPP without ensuring that the loans had a chance to flow to minority and women-owned businesses. He's still insisting that there's not a sense of urgency to put together another package to fix this. And his DC allies are, the bottom line, are obstructing the disclosure of information on the 4 million recipients of the $500 billion that was dispersed through the PPP loans. You're going to hear me say accountability and transparency a lot. I do believe, when I went to DC as a private citizen to try to fight for change that made our country stronger, it was accountability and transparency was how I was successful at building a broad bipartisan coalition. So we need to elect leaders who are committed to that transparency and accountability. I think that this recovery is going to be around for a while. We're going to be dealing with it for a while, especially with how our leaders are kind of bungling it. And as your senator, I would ensure complete accountability in determining who is getting help and addressing those unfair disparities quickly, because, coming back and addressing it a year later doesn't help a small business that's already gone under. We need to ensure that money is directed toward employees, by the way, when they do reach the businesses, and not corporate CEOs and stock buybacks. So there's a lot of accountability that was actually written into some of these things that the executive branch gutted, or the pandering senators like John Cornyn wouldn't stand up for.
Well, the change would be welcomed because many of our businesses, especially our more mature businesses that have been around for a while, have plenty of war stories about not being able to get funded, having to maybe go another route, so that accountability and transparency would be welcomed by our members for sure.
Mhm.
And speaking of the pandemic and the fact that people are not working because of it, I'm sure you're familiar with the office that President Obama set in place to deal with things like this pandemic. As a U.S. Senator, would you support reopening that office?
Absolutely. And it doesn't end there, but closure of this office in 2018 really crippled our ability to handle this pandemic and the next one, because there always is a next one, because we didn't have the existing infrastructure and resources in place that, were put there to be able to handle something like this. The office was created after the Ebola pandemic in 2014 to do everything possible to prepare for the next one and to try to prevent it from becoming an epidemic and a pandemic. And this was widely praised by experts in the field. Something that John Cornyn doesn't listen to is science and data and experts in the field. And he said nothing when it was closed in 2018, as he is silent so often when he should be speaking out for Texans when something happens from, within his own party. He's just unwilling to stand up and say that something was a mistake. We have to have this office and a senior administration official that's focused solely on global health security. As a veteran, I guess maybe I understand the threat of not just global pandemics, but bioterrorism. And as our world becomes more interconnected, the need for this office is even greater. That's one reason I think we need more veterans in office who understand not just what it means to put on the uniform and to risk your life for the security of our country and for our right to peacefully protest and all of the other things. But we also need people who understand the interconnectedness of diplomacy and foreign policy and why withdrawing our support for the World Health Organization and allowing China to come in and provide that support is bad for our national security. A lot of departments like the State Department and this office and others have suffered under this administration. And we've seen an exodus of really well-qualified people that had been, the adult in the room, if you will. So it's going to take, I think, hopefully not too soon, but it could take decades to repair some of the damage of some of these things closing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a reality, that we're faced with. And you mentioned foreign policy. How important do you think our relationships are overseas to business? Our president has taken some positions that some Americans agree with and some don't. So how important do you think those relationships are?
Incredibly important. When I said I worked in tech for 2 years, I worked at Dell, and I was on calls all around the world. My husband still works at Dell and is on calls, late at night. Those relationships are so important when it comes to negotiating trade, but also, to securing the rights of workers. I mean, I just can't overstate the importance of, look, when we have a president elected, immediately that person is referred to as the leader of the free world. And I believe we're at risk of losing that. And the influence that we have around the world, whether it's strategic use of humanitarian assistance, a lot of people want to cut back on humanitarian assistance. That's not just charity. That is a way we exert influence around the world. And we really do need to elect people who understand that importance and understand why we have to maintain leadership, why it's so bad for us to break with the international community, whether it's the Paris Climate Accord or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, or whether we break with the international community. I mean, you see what's happening right now with Israel annexing portions of the West Bank. I mean, we absolutely have a leadership position in the world right now that I think we're at risk of losing because of the actions of this administration and the silence of people like John Cornyn, because they lack the backbone to stand up and do something about it. He knows it's wrong, but he's not doing anything about it.
Well, it's interesting, your take on it, because, I think sometimes here in the United States, we're blinded by what we're doing. We can be extremely focused on what our day-to-day is, and we tend to tune out sometimes on foreign policy. And that's why I wanted you to speak about it, because the trade deals that we do affect our supply chain. The things that we use to manufacture our products and, the pricing of them. And so I do think that it is important for our members to have a senator in place who understands that.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
we have to have good foreign relationships to really be able to do good business here in the United States. So thank you for that. So, in our community right now, all of our ills are being highlighted just about. The fact that we have a school to prison pipeline, the police brutality, the wealth gap between African Americans and the white community, and all of those things are connected to systemic and institutionalized racism. So I would like to know what thoughts you might have on closing that gap. And then we'll talk a little bit about your platform for criminal justice.
Absolutely. So I always say that the first step is vote out people who are standing in the way of reform, but then we have to ensure we vote in people who understand the reforms that need to be put in place, right? But let's start with Senator Cornyn has really failed Black Texans, like he has failed all of us. But he specifically has failed Black Texans by voting 7 times against the Equal Pay for Texans, the Paycheck Fairness Act, the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. Black women only make 59 cents to the dollar to their white male counterparts. There's clearly a problem. He has recently said that he doesn't believe systemic racism exists, and said that during the hearings, I don't know if you saw this on the news, but it blew me away that a sitting senator would think that in order for systemic racism to exist, every single person has to be racist, without acknowledging that every single person has implicit bias. And he just doesn't understand these terms because he is isolated and alienated in an ivory tower, and he's just disconnected from the progress that we've made over the last 20 years because he's been in this little bubble in DC. So we have to vote people like that out, all right? But in terms of solutions for the wealth gap, we need to ensure adequate investment in schools and education. I do think that that's where it starts. We have to understand holistically the lasting legacies of redlining that prevented generational wealth for Black families. We need to have more pressure for salary transparency. You keep hearing that word come back, right? And ensure that employers are paying equal pay for equal work. There's a lot of good legislation out there that people are not following, that there's no teeth to, there's no accountability to, there's no consequences for. So we really need to vote in a fighter who is going to champion these policies and make sure that there's accountability attached to them and make it easier for people to pay their bills and keep food on the table without having to work 3 jobs. My mom worked 3 jobs raising us, and I know how hard that can be. We've got to level the playing field. I went to do that in DC when I was fighting to open jobs for women in the military. And I believe that we need more people who have a track record of being able to build broad bipartisan consensus, not on 10% of what we're fighting for, but on the whole kit and caboodle. We just can't go in there and accept half measures. We really, and I don't mean that it's all or nothing. I know how to, negotiate, and I understand that there are times when you're not going to get 100% of what you need, but 10% is not acceptable. 99% is acceptable. When it comes to criminal justice reform and policing, I know specifically to the community that I'm speaking to now, and the part of Texas that I'm asking to represent, people in Houston are reeling across the country, but specifically in George Floyd's home right there in Houston's 3rd Ward. I am filled with hope, though, that our calls for reform will not fall on deaf ears like I feel like they have for so long. This election cycle is our opportunity to be heard loud and clear. And I am profoundly and deeply aware that I am asking to represent folks across Texas that have been let down and sold out by the system and the people who've been supporting that system that refuses to enact the reforms that can make a difference in our communities. But we have to acknowledge it's not this administration only. It is a long suffered problem. It's decades and centuries back. We need both legislative change and culture change. So the legislative change are things like Campaign Zero. I keep saying we have to end for-profit policing practices, ensure that police departments are a part of and representative of their communities that they're policing, and that they're working closely with community leaders and oversight. But in order to really get the systemic reform that we need, we have to go beyond policing and criminal justice reform. And we have to look at the things we've already talked about today, like the systemic racism in our economy, in housing, in employment, in access to business capital, healthcare disparities, education. We have a lot of work to do. I know it sounds like we have a lot of work to do, but these things, these complex things, become simple when you invite communities to the table and collaborate on solutions instead of having the ego to think that you have all the answers and you're just going to go and act in people's best interest. I hate that that arrogance from politicians, but collaborating with communities on solutions. And then when you only are serving your constituents and not your party leaders and your campaign donors and your corporate, donors, then all of a sudden these things become more simple. So we just need to elect people that are, like we said, servant leaders, and vote out the people who are standing in the way of the type of reform that we need.
Yes, that's agreed. I was thinking about what you said about education being one of the first steps to kind of level the playing field. And one of the concerns that has come about, especially from talking to members of our chamber that have an education background, is the fact that our kids were already behind, and then due to COVID, they're at home and possibly don't have access to the internet, may not have a laptop, and their parents are more likely the ones to have to go to work rather than staying at home with their kids. So what are your thoughts on kind of closing that digital divide that we see in minority communities as far as educating our kids?
Yeah, we see it in, access to laptops, but also in Wi-Fi. I tell you, the experience of driving around the state for a year and feeling like, oh, well, I know it's going to take me all day to drive out to Lubbock and then all day to drive back. I can make a lot of phone calls on the road on the way there. That didn't work out because I kept losing service. And you have people in areas that are either they don't have access to the equipment, or they don't have access to the infrastructure to be able to do distance learning or telemedicine or all sorts of things. But specifically in education, we have to remove racial barriers to quality education. We shouldn't be able to determine someone's success based on their zip code. I keep coming back to the analogy of running a race, but at the starting gun, somebody is 60 yards ahead of you, right? We have to support. I'm a product of public schools myself. We have to support public school. We have to make sure that we take steps to replace practices like suspending people for willful defiance and other inherently subjective terms that risk letting implicit bias dictate punishment. Right? We have to instill programs that proactively teach and reinforce good behavior in teachers. And we have to end for-profit student loan practices that target low-income students and hamper their ability to invest in their future. They're predatory. John Cornyn knows that they're predatory, and he just doesn't do anything about them. I think that we should have a 6-month grace period to pay back student loans, by the way. This is something that I don't think it's enough attention, although I will say when we talk about education, a lot of attention is focused on college and not enough, in my opinion, on K through 12 and early childhood education as well. But when we talk about student loans, I think that we should have a grace period that's longer, like a 6-month grace period, and community service and other ways that you can pay back loans. The government shouldn't be profiting off of interest. There's a lot of work we need to do in education, especially with the disparities among communities of color. And if we're going to finally achieve our potential as a country and fulfill the promises that we've been making, that we are the country of opportunity and democracy and equality, it's that opportunity, it's that piece. We're not doing enough to ensure that opportunity. It's just not a reality for so many in this country, and that has to change.
Yes, I think I agree with you. I think K through 12 is largely ignored on the national level. We have an entire Department of Education as part of our federal government, but the impact needs to be made way before college as far as education is concerned. So it's good to hear that you recognize that because that's where the battle is won in K through 12.
Completely agree.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. And so for our last question, it's kind of a companion question as far as the African-American parents that typically have to go back to work and are working right now. It's the issue of paid leave. Some of our employers are not able to do it because they can't afford to, and some corporations are just refusing to do it. So what are your thoughts around paid work leave?
So I think, one of the reasons we've had healthcare disparities among communities of color as long as we've been measuring data. So this isn't the only reason, but one of the factors is that people of color are disproportionately in what the government is calling essential service, like essential workers that are keeping our country going. And we're not treating essential workers like they're essential. We're not providing them paid work leave. We're expecting them to keep our country going, but we don't provide them the PPE and the equipment and the safety measures. And we're not allowing liability on companies that are forcing their workers to work in unsafe circumstances. It's one of the reasons I've been partnering with unions and having some town halls with like transportation workers and meat packers, and just trying to show kind of what's happening with the working class in our country. This is why I think we need more regular working people and working parents to go and legislate. Because right now, when we have career politicians who are largely independently wealthy and haven't faced the challenges that we have faced, then they don't understand how to legislate solutions to those challenges, or they don't pick up on the unintended consequences or the gaps or the loopholes that end up really costing people heavy. I mentioned that my mom worked 3 jobs growing up. I have been laid off from a job. I've worked minimum wage. I've worried about where I'm going to get access to my healthcare. I've worried about, am I going to have Social Security? Is that going to be viable when I'm older? Is my mom going to have access to Social Security? Because I'm going to have to take care of her. A lot of people in our generation, Carol, are worried about that. John Cornyn's never worried about that. He's on 3 taxpayer-funded pensions. So he is not making it a priority to protect Social Security. Social Security, by the way, and I know we're talking about paid work leave, but Social Security is one of the things that I hear about the most on the campaign trail, and the least with, the Washington Post and kind of the political echo chamber. But it's these kitchen table issues and the bread and butter and paid work leave that I think that we are really failing people. Cornyn is very out of touch when he said that coronavirus was going to be a piece of cake with social distancing. Clearly, getting sick is the only thing he's worried about. We're worried about losing our jobs. We're worried about buying toilet paper. We're worried about getting food on the table, healthy food for our kids. We're worried about homeschooling. I keep saying every day around here is Teacher Appreciation Day, because in addition to having to, work and keep food on the table, I'm also trying to homeschool my kids and beat John Cornyn. So I think that, paid sick leave is absolutely critical. I support expanding emergency paid sick leave as we grapple with this pandemic, and so that workers don't actually have to choose between caring for their own health and their family or infecting their colleagues and still keeping a roof over their head. My campaign absolutely supports paid sick leave for our employees, as well as if family members become sick. We've had, staff members lose family members and have family members get sick. And I don't think that the state should be overruling cities on sick leave. We should be protecting Texans now. I think that we should require employers to offer at least 12 weeks of paid family sick leave for parents. It's just so important for the well-being of families. We're just not thinking about the impact that we're having on the strength of our country as a global power 20 years from now, when we're talking about how we're supporting families and parents and kids, right? I've been through 2 really tough pregnancies. I can't imagine what we would have done if my husband, Brandon, didn't have paid paternity leave from Dell. I'm so grateful, but I don't think that we should be depending on the luck of working for an employer that provides it. I think that this is something that other countries are able to do. And I don't know about you, but I was raised to believe if other countries can do it, we can do it better, because we're America. So let's start proving that with our healthcare model and the way that we treat parents and paternal and maternity leave and paid sick leave, and how we care for our families, AKA the future of our country.
Absolutely. They are the future of our country.
Literally.
We need to act now.
Yes.
It's critical.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really something that we can kind of put on the back burner and hope it works itself out without ideas and action. So yeah,
exactly.
Something that we've got to work on now. So I know we're at the end of our time, and I appreciate your being with us today. Are there any closing thoughts you'd like to share with our chamber members?
Sure. I said earlier that I'm running to protect the world that my boys are growing up into. And they often like to say that I'm standing up to bullies. And I love that. I love that that's the message that they're getting from the campaign, because they overhear, these conversations in my phone calls. But it's more than that. I mean, this moment right now is our chance to send a global message. It's not only important for business, but for foreign policy and everything that we, you know, are able to send a message through our votes that this is not who we are. The actions of this administration, including John Cornyn, since he props it up, is not who we are as a country, is not who we are as a state. You know, I don't know how many of y'all listening deal globally, but when people find out you're from Texas, they start to make certain assumptions about you. I would like to change what those assumptions are and what we are known for in our state. We can take on these tough problems, and we can show the world that we do still stand for freedom and opportunity and democracy. But we have to tackle systemic racial injustice, not enough people with access to healthcare, our broken immigration system, our gun violence epidemic, climate change, an economy that does not work for everyday Texans. Let's not forget that those things are still here and still problems, and we still need leadership to be able to address those things. I believe that when we come together, there's nothing that we can't solve, and there's no change that we can't ensure comes about. We need leaders who will put politics aside and build broad coalitions to get the mission done. In the military, I had to work with people that I didn't agree with all the time. We were able to put the mission first, and that's what we have to be able to do. And I can do that if I have y'all's support, and I would really appreciate the opportunity to earn your vote. And if I haven't done that yet, please reach out to the campaign and ask more questions and give me your ideas and solutions. I can't wait to collaborate with y'all, not just over, like I said, the next 4 months, but over the next 6 years as well. So thanks for, you know, giving me some time to show you my vision for our state.
Absolutely. We want our chamber members to be as informed as possible when it comes to elections, because they definitely affect the way we do business. So thank you for your time today. And I'd like to remind everyone out there, every Tuesday and Thursday, we have Chamber Chat. The purpose is to help you in growing and expanding your business and sustaining your business during COVID-19. So please monitor our website at ghbcc.com. Tune in every Tuesday and Thursday for Chamber Chat to catch up on the latest topics that we have. And also consider donating to our Chamber Foundation. It's a 501c3, so it's tax deductible. And the foundation enables us to continue bringing you these types of programs. Also, support our businesses through HoustonByBlack.com. That's HoustonByBlack.com. We need to have a robust chamber economy so that we can contribute to our regional economy by creating jobs and putting more wealth into our community. So thank you, everyone, for joining Chamber Chat. Thank you, MJ Hegar, for joining us again today. And we'll see everyone. Yes, absolutely. We'll see everyone next time on Chamber Chat.